Welcome back, everyone. We are now awaiting a readout from the very important phone call that President Biden just wrapped up with Russian President Vladimir Putin, where they were talking, hopefully, about a diplomatic resolution to what's happening in Ukraine. We're hoping to get those details in just a little bit. In the meantime, Republican Congressman from Texas and member of the House Financial Services Committee, Lance Gooden, joins us now. Congressman, thanks for joining us on this Saturday. A lot of news to talk about, but let me first ask you about Ukraine. So as I mentioned, the president just wrapped up an hour-long phone call with President Putin. We understand that President Putin also talked with French leader Macron and officials from the Belarus. But can you shed any light on how you think the phone call with President Biden went?
Well, I'm not in the room, but I'm hopeful that they've made some progress. I know President Putin has some demands, and I don't know if we'll be interested in those. But I think at this point, anything that pushes this as far away into the future and prevents an invasion is a positive development. I'm told that we're only a day or two away from an invasion, but I hope that's not accurate. And I also wish we'd have had this same kind of contemplation back when we were leaving Afghanistan. We would have been in a certainly better position there, and perhaps Putin would take us more seriously today.
Well, it does seem that the White House has gone into overdrive, urging everyone to leave. So a little bit of a different situation than Afghanistan right there. You know, it's interesting. You mentioned that Putin has demands. One of the demands is that Ukraine not become a member of NATO. Why do we want Ukraine to become a member of NATO, or do we?
Well, I think that's up to Ukraine. I think that they have that prerogative, and I would support that. I think that it's important that NATO is strengthened. But I've also heard interesting ideas in the past of inviting Russia to join NATO. It kind of goes in contradicts the reason for NATO's creation in the first place, but the Soviet Union's not in its state anymore, and I think anything we can do to help create a more peaceful situation in that part of the world is a positive development. Europe is certainly concerned with the way things are going now, and I think Mr. Putin wants to be respected and wants to be a player on the main stage and on the world stage, and I think there are ways to perhaps give him a piece of what he wants and prevent war, and I hope we'll potentially get there.
Yeah, that was going to be my last question on Ukraine. Do you think there is a diplomatic solution available in this 11th hour?
There's always a solution available. It's whether or not the players want to take that solution. I can't imagine a scenario where invading Ukraine would be a positive development for Russia. But Putin perhaps has a different perspective. We'll see how that develops and how this call today went with the White House.
Yeah, we are certainly waiting for those details. In the meantime, let me move on to another topic, inflation. New numbers came out yesterday showing inflation is nearly at a record high now, 7.5%. Take a look at that. The highest since the early 80s. You know, so people have less money to spend on higher priced goods and services. I also want to show you a list of just how expensive things are getting now. Look at this. We have prices of basic things like cars and meat and, you know, all kinds of other things up a whopping amount. I mean, cars, used cars in particular, 40%. So how long can people expect to have to spend extra money on things? There's one study that says the average household is spending $250 a month.
Yeah, you know, the Fed Chairman Powell spoke to the Financial Services Committee last fall and said that this was supposed to be transitory. And his prediction was it would go into the summer months. Well, the summer months aren't that far away. And we're seeing crazy things we've never seen before. Used cars are selling for more than what they cost new many years ago. And unheard of housing price increases. I don't know what the future holds, but I know the future will be bleak as long as the only solution the Democrats have is to continue spending more money. And all these spending packages that we have talked about, the Build Back Better, these are things that will increase inflation and just further delay our recovery. I would encourage the Democratic-led government in Washington to work with Republicans and work to rein in spending and get these prices down. It's a serious problem for Americans. Super Bowl parties and Valentine's will be very expensive this year. And those are luxury items, perhaps, but your day-to-day items are through the roof. Seniors on fixed incomes, they can't afford these prices. Families with many children, those who commute to work, are paying more for gas than they ever paid under the Trump administration. And it's a very difficult situation. And I think this administration realizes that, and they're going to pay at the polls in November.
Yeah, a lot of people on fixed incomes are really feeling this. And, you know, who knew your used car would be so valuable, right?
Right.
I want to just move to another topic and talk about what's happening in Canada with the Freedom Convoy. You know, I think a lot of people certainly appreciate their message, but they are blocking key bridges, only adding now to the supply chain issues, which affect inflation that we were just talking about. So I want to ask you, Congressman, would you invite that kind of protest by U.S. truckers or any other group to the U.S. Capitol, considering the ramifications we are seeing up in Ottawa that are affecting the U.S.?
I would invite any group, for whatever reason, to peacefully protest anytime. I don't appreciate or condone violent protest like the Black Lives Matter movement that you saw. You know, this seems to be such a crisis that these peaceful truckers are stalling progress and protesting, but there was no outrage on the left when Black Lives Matter protests were destroying our streets and our cities across our nation. So I would absolutely welcome a similar pronouncement of protest in our nation's capital by truckers and anyone who wants their freedoms back. People are fed up with these overbearing, overburdening regulations that are not based in science. The science has not changed, but the polling has changed, and we're seeing outrage, and we're seeing people from all political walks of life sick of what they've been dealing with for the last 2 years.
All right. Representative Lance Gooden, thank you so much for your time on this Saturday.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.